Hello, my name is Kyle Quillen, and this is a series on how to program in Java, specifically using JGrasp. In this video series, I'll be walking through a general idea of what an IDE is, what sequencing, selection, and iteration is, and where you can go after learning the concepts you've learned in this video. So in this first video today, I'll be showing you what an IDE is and basically the really basics to how you can use an IDE. So very first, an IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, which basically means it is a program where you can make programs. As you can see, we have JGrasp open. This is for the language Java, as I mentioned earlier. And there's a couple main sections you should focus on. The center section right here is the text editor. This is where you put in text to make your program. If you want to open a new file, you can go to File, New, Java, and then right here you can just type in your program. Down here is the interactions menu. This will show you inputs and outputs. If you learn how to use a scanner, which I would highly recommend looking into because it allows you to put in input through your system and it outputs, or it can do outputs too by writing files. You can also use this to check code before you put it in here. This is really good later on when I mention data types, because you can look into how integer division works. Say 9 divided by 2, if you notice the answer is 4, not 4.5, and that's because numbers work weird in programming languages. And you can kind of test out to make sure your output will be exactly what you want. Over here to the left, we have your files. You can go over here and set where your files are. Just pick a spot on your desktop that makes it easy to find them, and I would recommend organizing them by folders. As you can see, when you make a Java file, there's two different types, a .java and a .class. It's important to make sure you have both of these, but really the file that you open is the .java. And the last thing is this toolbar up here. There's some other things like a debug menu. These are more complicated things that aren't necessary at this level. I would recommend looking into a more detailed guide that breaks down how to use the debug menu and the cool little things you can do with a IDE. I would recommend going over here to settings, CSD window settings, and then turning on line numbers. It'll just make it easier for you to see where your code is, and down here, if it throws an error, it'll tell you what line it's on. So then now you can check what line that will be on. And up here is how, just like any other program, how you can make new files. Really, there's a lot up here. I would recommend just looking through this. Really, it's not too complicated. It's just basically a program to make programs. So it's mostly the text editors which you're going to be focused on. 3 key combinations you should know and memorize, especially for JGrasp. It differs depending on the IDE. Is Control S to save, Control B to compile, and Control R to run. These I will mention more in depth when we go through our first program. And also understand that all IDEs are different. There's different reasons to use different ones. JGrasp is just a very beginner-friendly one because it doesn't hold your hand and allows you to notice your mistakes early on so you don't make repeated mistakes later on when you start programming more complicated things. And that's all about IDEs that is important right now. For the next video, I'll be showing you the concept of sequencing, and I'll see you then. Hello, my name is Kyle Quillen, and this is part 2 in my series on how to program in Java. This video is going to be based on the idea of sequencing. Sequencing is the idea that your code runs like a list of instructions. Think about each line of your code being the line and the set of order that your program language reads the code. Right now, we're going to make a new file, and I'll show you what that means. So if you don't remember making a new file, you want to go up to the top left corner over here and click File, New, Java. Then right here, we're going to type in public class test 2. And I'm naming it test 2 just for example's sake. As you can see, public and class are highlighted. For when you're writing in Java, you want to make sure you use a certain type of language. It's called syntax. It's basically the words that the program, or the programming language, understands. It's the language it speaks. So when we put public class, Java will then read it as public, meaning anything can access it, and class meaning it's its own program. Test 2 is just the name I decided to give it. Now, if we go to save our program, we do Control S, and you can see that down here, the file name should match the class name up here. So we're going to save that, and it should go to the side right here. Now, we're going to type in public static, if I can type, public static void, main string, strings is capitalized by the way, put 2 brackets, args, and then don't forget those squiggly colons. So first, as you can see, I'm organizing my code. This helps with readability. Making sure you name things with proper names is important, but for test 2, that is anything, you can make it whatever you want. I recommend capitalizing all the words in it because it's just programming standard. It's called style, and you can look up different companies' styles on how they like their programs looking. If you want a good example, I would recommend looking into Google's because it's pretty standard and a lot of companies copy Google's style. And I think it just helps with reading your code, and it's very important if you decide to work in industry. As you can see, there's a star right here, meaning our program's not saved, so let's save that. Public static void main string args is something you should burn into your brain. This is what is known as the main method. Basically, when you're testing code, your computer will look for this main method and then run all the instructions in this and output it to your system. This is important because you can do this to make driver programs or programs that actually physically run your code. Later on, once you get into more advanced sections of programming like multi-class programs, you'll not really use the public static void main string args or the main method very much because it's just not necessary. But it is always good for testing your code at the very least. And when starting off, it allows you to make programs that you can run immediately. So now we're going to type in what it runs. So keep in mind, public class is the program. Anything inside of these 2 brackets for the main method will be ran. So it's important to make sure when you're making your programs, you have public class name, public static void main string args. So you should write it exactly as it's shown right here. Keep in mind that the syntax is important, so spelling's important. It can only read exactly what you put down, which is good because that means you know the computer will always run it the same no matter what, but it's bad because you have to be very specific. So now we're going to type in system.out.println and then put hello world within these quotation marks. And then if you notice at the end I put a semicolon that basically tells Java where a line ends. Either looks for these squiggly brackets or this semicolon right here. So now we're going to save our code by doing Control S, and then we're going to compile our code so our programming language prepares it to be ran. So you do Control B, close the interactions menu, and it should compile it. As you can see, if there's any errors like I threw up here in my original draft for this video, it will tell you basically what line that error is on, and it'll do that when you go to compile your code. I always compile it multiple times sometimes just to make sure, and it's saved, so let's run it. And how you run your code is you do Control R. So when we run that, let's try it again. Oh, there we go. As you can see down here, it says hello world. and you just wrote your first ever program. Now, to remind you what sequencing is, as you can see, there's 5 lines right here, and Java went through each line until it found system.out.print, which it reads as, for the system outputs, we print on a new line, hello world. And that's what it did down here in our in and out menu. And that is the first ever program. Hello, my name is Kyle Quillen, and this is part 3 of my video series on how to program in Java. Today we'll be talking about the idea of selection. Basically, what selection means is that your program is able to run multiple different lines and take different paths. So, I did mention that sequencing is running a set of instructions and how you can't run 2 different lines at once. So that's not what we're doing. We're basically making it so our program reaches a spot where it has to pick a path to go based off of the information or the condition we give it. So right now we have our program test2 that we made in the last video. We're going to add, let's get rid of this line hello world, and let's add, basically, the first thing we're going to add is a variable. Sorry about that. I ran into an issue. For some weird reason, JGrass was not letting me type in any text. Sometimes when it comes to program or IDEs, you kind of have to fight it. It's very rare that JGrass has problems. This is my first time I've ever ran into a problem with it. And it's always good to know that if you run into a problem with like typing or running code and it's not your code directly, it never hurts to save and then restart the IDE. Anyway, we're gonna delete this line right here, line 3, and we're gonna type in int num equals 4. I picked 4 because I felt like it. Anyway, what this right here is int, that stands for integer. Basically, there's different types of data named data types, if you believe it. There's primitive data types, and then there's complicated ones known as objects. Objects we're not really going to mention too much. You do have experience with objects, though. There's one data type that's not primitive, but an actual object or complicated, and that is string. Strings are basically a set or a bunch of characters combined. Right now on the screen, I'm going to show you a photo of all the different data types. It's not really important to know why you use different ones over ones right now. What is important, though, is to memorize what an integer and a double is. If we go into our interactions menu down here, I can show you the double is anything with a decimal point. There's also longs and shorts. These are forms of integers or doubles, but they hold less data, so it's good to use them if you're not trying to hold a lot of decimal points. I would recommend looking into, if you care about making your code run as efficiently as possible and has the best, takes advantage of the space as much as possible, I would look into what different data types, how much data they hold. I recommend sticking with integers and doubles. You can also use floats instead of doubles because they hold less, they take up less storage. However, it's not really that important later on, because if you make really advanced programs, you'll be holding hundreds of thousands of these data points, and they take a while for them to legitimately add up. So for right now, it doesn't really matter. I would look into it for the future, though. So we're going to say if the num that we put up here for this variable, by the way, I forgot to mention, this variable, integer num equals 4. Num is the variable name. The equal sign tells the program what to assign the value for num, and int is the data type. Don't forget the semicolon also that I mentioned in the last video. And then we're going to put right here, if num equals 3. Just to put a condition in here. As you see, we use double equals instead of a single equals because we're testing if the value in num is equal to 3, not assigning the value. That's important to keep in mind. Double equals checks, normal equals assigns a value. And let's say if it equals 3, then let's do system.out.print, and then let's print out num. And now we can also put an else statement. And we can take system.out.print right here, copy and paste it. Let's put ln at the end so it starts on a new line. System.out.print is an actual method you can run. It will just print everything next to each other instead of on separate lines. And let's, instead of putting num here, let's say number was not 3. Or we can do number was not 3. As I mentioned, strings are objects. Right here is a string. It's a list of characters. A character is basically an individual character. Like capital N is its own value. So anyway, we did that. So let's save our code. Press B to compile. Then throw any errors, and then Control R to run. Oh, there we go. And as you can see right now, number was not 3. So what our code did was it stored the value for in nums. It checked right here if num was equal to 3. And since it wasn't, it ran the else section. Now, if you wanted to, you can end this else section. Also, our code ran, stored the value in nums, checked the value to see if it was equal to 3, and notice it wasn't, put it in, it went down the else path. Now we can also put else if, and put if num equals to 4 if we really wanted to. And then it would check this condition right here. Now there's different types of conditional statements. I'll put those on the screen right now. Basically, you can check if a number is greater than or less than, equal to, not equal to. And you can use the data type, one of the data types that I showed earlier, known as a Boolean, which is either the value true or false. Those are also considered conditional statements. Actually, this conditional statement right here, the computer will run that as a Boolean, or true or false. You can try to print this out and it'll print out true or false, but make sure you don't put it in quotation marks because then it'll read it as a string. Anyway, if you want to see the other path run in the code, let's delete this and set if num is, let's do not equal to 3. And let's fix our wording here. And then let's save, compile by doing Control B and then Control R to run. And we'll see and printed out the number 4. And that is the idea of selection. Hello, my name is Kyle Quillen, and this is part 4 of my series on how to program in Java. In this section, we'll be talking about the idea of iteration. This is also my final part of this section, so we'll kind of try to make a program that overviews everything we learned. Last time we talked about selection, which was the idea that our code can take multiple paths. So let's now implement the idea of iteration. Iteration means that your code can run over and over again, or it can repeat itself. Now, you might ask, well, can't I just copy and paste my code? And that is possible. You definitely can do that. But the main thing is, what if you want to repeat that code like 30 million times? Which isn't a real number. You can repeat it by. You're not going to want to make 30 million lines of code to print that out or to run that. You're going to just want to have a section that does it for you. So right here, let's delete all the code in here. And there's 2 loops I want to go through, or 2 ways to do the idea of iteration. Let me fix how my code is displaying. So there's two loops. There's a for loop and a while loop. Basically, the difference is a for loop, you assign a value inside of it, and it'll run exactly as much times as you say it should. So for example, we're going to assign the value inside of it, integer I. I is what's typically used for the for loop. It means index. That's not important right now, but later on, if you look into arrays, which is just like up here, this is a string array. It's a list of values. You can make any array from any value. I'll recommend looking into that next because that is a very important concept to programming, but that's not part of the series, so I would look for outside sources for it. Anyway, integer I equals 0. 0 is the typical start index for an array, so that's why we typically make it equal to 0, but you can equal this to anything you want. And then we're going to do I is less than, let's say, 5. This is a conditional statement, so basically, let me finish writing this, and then let's put I plus plus. Now, as you can see, integer I assigns the value 0 to I. Over on this section, what this means is when it goes through the section of code designated in these squiggly brackets for the for loop, every single time it will make the value I go up by exactly 1. And what this section right here, I is less than 5, it's a conditional statement that basically will check the value of I each time it repeats, and it'll stop repeating once I is either equal to 5 or greater than 5. In this section right here, you can really do anything. You can do I equals I plus 2 if you want it to repeat by 2, but I'm just going to make it iterate up once per run. And then let's just do system.out.print ln hello world. So what this program should do is it should repeat this line of code around 4 or 5 times. So let's save the code, compile it, doesn't throw any errors, and then let's run it. And if we look, it printed it 5 times. So for loops are really good for if you know the exact amount of times you want your code to repeat. Now there's a while loop. While loops are a bit simpler to write. Let me fix my code. For a while loop, it's as simple as just putting while, and then you want to use the same circle brackets or parentheses that we used earlier for the conditional statements, and then these squiggly brackets right here. And in here, let's just say num is less than 6. And then up here, let's put integer num equals 2. Now a while loop is really good for if you want your code to repeat until it reaches this condition. So what it'll do is instead of adjusting a value inside of it, it'll check a certain value and keep running until that value is met. This is good if you have conditional statements within here, with one section equaling true and the other one being false, and it sets the condition in here to either true or false. So then it will repeat the code until it's set to either true or false, whatever you choose. But for now, we're going to kind of use it for the same idea that we used a for loop for. One thing that's important about while loops is whatever this condition is in here, you got to make sure that within the loop, that condition will change. Because if it doesn't, then the loop will run infinitely. So right now, let's make sure we put that statement in here. Let's make it so num equals num plus 2. This makes it so whenever it loops through this, it will change value of num so that eventually it's going to be equal to or greater than 6, which will then make this condition equal false, which then will make it so the code won't repeat. So let's also put a statement above this. Let's do system.out.println. If you believe it, we're gonna put hello world. And let's save it, compile. Oh, 2 errors. Oh, look at that. Println. As you can see, it told me the lines of these errors, by the way. It said Java line 5, which is the same line right here. Errors happen all the time. Even people who are experienced with programming run into errors every single time, so don't worry about it. Save it again, compile, and then run it. And look, it printed it twice because number equal 2. The first time it printed it out, added 2 to make it equal 4. Then it ran through it again because the condition was still true, printed it out num plus 2 equals 6, which is equal to 6, and this is designated for less than. So therefore, it stopped running the loop. Now you can also have statements within here this is called nesting. Let's make it so num iterates up once, so we can just do num plus plus. You can also do num equals num plus 1, but this is just a quicker way to write it down. And then we can say if num does not equal, let's say 4, then we can run, well, if num does not equal 3, then print hello world. And then after this, make sure that the number still is iterated up so it's not repeated infinitely. My code's a bit messy right now, I apologize for that. But keep in mind that anything that comes after these statements still runs. So it'll check the statement. If it's true, it will then run this code, and then it'll still run this after because it's not in an else statement. If I put an else statement and then put num plus plus in there, then it will run that code instead if it's false, and only run it when this is false. But since it's after without being inside a conditional statement, it will still run no matter what. And another thing is you can also put loops inside of each other and conditional statements inside of each other. So keep that in mind when you are programming, that you're not limited to putting them only once. You can put an if statement inside of an if statement inside of a while loop if you really want to. Anyway, this code looks good to me. Let's check by saving it, compiling it. Oh, 2 errors. Look there, I forgot my very special semicolon. I put a squiggly bracket instead. Save, compile, run. Then it printed 3 times. We can say if, let's say, just to show it off better, if num is less than 3, then print it. And if let's save it, compile it, and run it, should only print once. Yep. And as you can see, it only printed once because of that conditional statement. And that's the idea of iteration. Now to recap, sequencing goes through like it's a set of instructions. Conditional picks a path for your code to go on. In this case, if this value is not true, then it'll just skip over this. And a while loop or for loop is the idea of iteration, which means that your code is, it repeats itself. So sequencing, selection, and iteration, these are core concepts in programming. Now, with all 3 of these concepts, using what you learned from these videos, you should be able to make your own basic programs. Now, if you really want to type in programs actively, say you want to put in your own input and save it inside this variable, I would recommend looking to scanners, like I mentioned in one of the past videos. And I would also recommend finding other video series for more advanced topics in programming. The whole point of the series was to mostly have a good beginner guide on how to start programming and have all the information organized in a direct series where you could access it. And because of that, this series does not cover more complicated material. I feel like it's important to also know that YouTube is an amazing option. ChatGPT will help you by looking at your code, and it can tell you what's wrong with it and why it's not running the way you want it to. And really just looking into areas and trying to grow your knowledge base is always helpful. It doesn't hurt to try out new things when it comes to programming. And with the concepts you learned from these videos, you now understand enough to make a lot of programs. You would be surprised how much you can do with the knowledge you have now. So I would recommend playing around with it, applying it, and trying to make your own programs out of it. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.